Picture this. A confident young black woman walks through the doors of Riverside Academy, her first teaching position in the prestigious suburbs of Phoenix, Arizona. She carries herself with quiet dignity, unaware that 3 notorious students have already marked her as their next target. What these bullies don't know is that beneath her professional exterior lies 15 years of rigorous martial arts training and a third-degree black belt that has never failed her when it mattered most. They're about to learn that calling someone stupid can be the biggest mistake of their lives. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine campus of Riverside Academy as Dr. Serena Williams Hayes stepped out of her modest blue Honda Civic. At 29, she possessed an understated elegance that commanded respect without demanding attention. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she wore a crisp burgundy blazer over black slacks, her ensemble both professional and approachable. In her leather briefcase were carefully prepared lesson plans, a small succulent plant for her desk, and a worn photo of her late grandmother who had always believed education could change the world. Serena had spent the previous 3 weeks preparing for this moment. After completing her doctorate in English literature at Arizona State University, she had applied to dozens of schools across the Southwest. Riverside Academy, with its reputation for academic excellence and diverse student body, seemed like the perfect place to begin her teaching career. The school served the affluent Scottsdale district, where manicured lawns met desert landscapes and opportunity seemed endless. As she walked across the parking lot, Serena noticed the other faculty members arriving in luxury vehicles that dwarfed her modest car. The disparity didn't intimidate her. It only strengthened her resolve to prove that excellence came from dedication, not from material wealth. She had grown up in a working-class neighborhood in Tucson, where her father worked double shifts at an automotive plant and her mother cleaned office buildings at night to pay for Serena's karate lessons. The decision to enroll Serena in martial arts had come after a particularly difficult week in middle school, when older students had cornered her after class, mocking her second-hand clothes and her ambitious dreams of becoming a teacher. Her parents, Maria and Robert Hayes, had saved for months to afford the enrollment fee at Master Chen's traditional karate academy. What began as a means of self-defense had evolved into a spiritual journey that shaped every aspect of Serena's character. Under Master Chen's patient guidance, Serena learned that true strength came not from the ability to inflict harm, but from the discipline to remain calm under pressure, and the wisdom to choose when to act. Through countless hours of practice, meditation, and philosophical study, she had earned her black belt at 18 and continued training through college and graduate school. The dojo had become her sanctuary, a place where academic stress melted away and her spirit found balance. Now, walking through the corridors of Riverside Academy, Serena felt that familiar centered calm that came from years of martial arts training. The school's architecture was impressive, with high ceilings, large windows, and motivational quotes etched into the walls. Students moved through the hallways with the confident ease of young people who had never questioned their place in the world. Serena's classroom, room 142, was located in the humanities wing, overlooking the school's award-winning courtyard garden. Large windows flooded the space with natural light, and she immediately began arranging the desks in a circular pattern to encourage discussion and collaboration. She placed her succulent on the windowsill, a small reminder of growth and resilience, and wrote her name on the whiteboard in elegant script, Dr. Serena Williams Hayes. The first period bell rang at 8:15 a.m., and students began filtering into the classroom. Most offered polite greetings, curious about their new English teacher. Serena stood by the door, making eye contact with each student and offering a warm smile. She had studied their files extensively, learning names, academic histories, and personal interests to better connect with each individual. Among the students entering her advanced placement English literature class were 3 young men who immediately caught her attention, though not for positive reasons. The first was Connor Mitchell, a tall, athletic 17-year-old with perfectly styled blonde hair and designer clothing that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. His father, James Mitchell, owned the largest real estate development company in Arizona, and Connor carried himself with the entitled swagger of someone who had never faced real consequences for his actions. Behind Connor walked his closest ally, Brandon Torres, whose muscular build and intense stare served as an unspoken threat to anyone who might challenge their group's dominance. Despite his Hispanic surname, Brandon had grown up in privilege, his family having made their fortune in construction. He was known throughout the school as Connor's enforcer, the one who turned verbal intimidation into physical reality when their targets didn't comply quickly enough. The third member of their trio was perhaps the most dangerous. Kevin Park, an academically gifted student whose clean-cut appearance and honor roll status provided perfect cover for his role as the group's strategist. Kevin's parents were both prominent surgeons who had immigrated from South Korea and built a successful medical practice. His high grades and polite demeanor with adults made him nearly untouchable, even as he orchestrated elaborate schemes to destroy the reputations and confidence of those who crossed their path. Together, these three had systematically terrorized Riverside Academy for over 2 years. Their method was sophisticated and calculating. They identified new teachers, particularly those from diverse backgrounds, or those who showed signs of challenging their authority, and then launched coordinated campaigns of psychological warfare designed to force resignations or transfers. Their previous victim had been Mrs. Patricia Johnson, a veteran educator with 30 years of experience who had dared to give Connor a failing grade on a major essay. Within weeks, the trio had spread rumors about her teaching competency, vandalized her car, and created fake social media accounts to post inflammatory content under her name. Mrs. Johnson, despite her experience and tenure, had requested a transfer to another district rather than continue fighting a battle that seemed impossible to win. As Connor settled into his seat in the back row, he studied the new teacher with calculating eyes. He had already researched Dr. Williams Hayes online, discovering her academic credentials and middle-class background. In his mind, she represented everything he had been taught to view as inferior, someone who had to work for their achievements rather than inherit them, someone who believed in merit over connections, someone who might actually expect him to earn his grades. Brandon cracked his knuckles and stretched in his chair, his physical presence serving as a constant reminder of the consequences that awaited anyone who challenged their authority. He had perfected the art of intimidation through body language, using his size and strength to create an atmosphere of threat without technically crossing lines that would result in suspension. Kevin, meanwhile, appeared to be the model student, opening his notebook and preparing to take notes. His pen moved across the page, but instead of recording academic information, he was already drafting the first phase of their campaign against Dr. Williams Hayes. He had learned that the most effective attacks combine truth with fiction, creating narratives that were believable enough to spread, but damaging enough to destroy credibility. Serena began her first class with genuine enthusiasm, introducing herself and outlining her teaching philosophy. She spoke about literature as a window into the human experience, about the power of words to create understanding across cultural and social divides, and about her belief that every student possessed unique insights worth sharing. "I want this classroom to be a place where we can explore difficult questions together," she said, her voice carrying the quiet confidence that came from years of training in both academic and martial arts disciplines. Literature doesn't just tell us stories about other people's lives. It helps us understand our own experiences and challenges us to grow as human beings. Most of the students responded positively to her approach, asking thoughtful questions about the semester's reading list and sharing their own perspectives on the books they would study. The discussion flowed naturally, with Serena skillfully guiding the conversation to include multiple viewpoints while maintaining academic rigor. Connor, however, saw this collaborative approach as a sign of weakness rather than strength. In his experience, teachers who sought student input were usually desperate for approval and easily manipulated. He exchanged glances with Brandon and Kevin, a silent communication that had been perfected through years of coordinated bullying campaigns. As the class period drew to a close, Serena assigned the first reading assignment and reminded students about the discussion format they would use for upcoming classes. The majority of students gathered their materials with obvious enthusiasm for the semester ahead, but Connor made sure to catch Dr. Williams Hayes' attention as he stood to leave. "Interesting teaching style, Dr. Williams Hayes," he said, his tone carefully modulated to sound respectful, while carrying an undertone of condescension that only she would catch. "I hope you're prepared for how we do things here at Riverside. Not every approach that works in other places is going to be successful with our student body." The comment hung in the air like a challenge, and Serena felt the familiar sensation that had warned her of danger countless times during her martial arts training. Her years in the dojo had taught her to recognize the subtle signs of an impending attack, whether physical or psychological, and every instinct told her that Connor Mitchell was testing her response to establish the dynamics of their future interactions. Rather than rising to the bait, Serena smiled calmly and replied, "I appreciate your concern, Connor. I'm confident that respect and high expectations work well everywhere, and I'm looking forward to seeing what you and your classmates accomplish this semester." Her response, delivered with perfect composure, clearly frustrated Connor, who had expected either defensive anger or nervous appeasement. As he left the classroom with Brandon and Kevin flanking him, Serena could see them already beginning to strategize their next move. Alone in her classroom after the students had departed, Serena took a deep breath and centered herself using techniques Master Chen had taught her years ago. She had faced challenges before, both in academic settings and in martial arts competitions, and she understood that the true test of her abilities was just beginning. The following morning brought with it an unexpected chill that seemed to settle over Riverside Academy like an ominous cloud. Dr. Serena Williams Hayes arrived to find her assigned parking space occupied by an expensive sports car, forcing her to park in a distant corner of the faculty lot. It was a small inconvenience, but one that felt deliberately orchestrated rather than accidental. As she walked across campus, Serena noticed subtle changes in the atmosphere around her. Conversations seemed to pause when she approached, only to resume in hushed whispers after she passed. Several colleagues who had been friendly during orientation week now offered only brief nods instead of their usual warm greetings. The shift was so pronounced that Serena wondered if she had somehow misunderstood the school's culture during her initial interviews. What Serena didn't realize was that Connor Mitchell's family influence extended far beyond the student body. James Mitchell's real estate empire had developed half the neighborhoods where Riverside Academy faculty lived, and his charitable foundation provided substantial funding for school programs. This financial leverage gave the Mitchell family considerable sway over administrative decisions, and Connor had learned to weaponize these connections from an early age. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The previous evening, Connor had made a strategic phone call to his father, carefully framing his concerns about the new English teacher. He spoke of her unconventional methods and questioned whether someone from her background truly understood the expectations of Riverside's distinguished families. James Mitchell, always protective of his son's academic standing and social position, had made his own series of calls to school board members and key administrators. By morning, Principal Margaret Thornton had received 3 separate inquiries about Dr. Williams Hayes' teaching qualifications, each phrased as concerned questions about maintaining academic standards. The principal, a political survivor who understood the delicate balance of managing wealthy families while maintaining educational integrity, found herself caught between supporting her new teacher and avoiding conflict with the school's most influential donors. Meanwhile, Kevin Park had begun his own campaign of psychological warfare, employing the same methodical approach that had earned him academic honors. He had spent hours crafting seemingly innocent social media posts that questioned the value of trendy teaching methods, carefully avoiding direct mentions of Dr. Williams Hayes while making his target obvious to anyone familiar with the situation. Kevin's posts gained traction among students whose parents valued traditional educational approaches, and soon a subtle narrative began emerging that portrayed innovation in teaching as a threat to academic rigor. He had learned that the most effective character assassination campaigns never appeared deliberate. Instead, they created environments where doubt could flourish naturally. Brandon Torres contributed to the effort through his network of athletic friends and their families. As a star linebacker whose father's construction company had built the school's new gymnasium, Brandon wielded influence among the sports-oriented families who formed a significant portion of the school's donor base. His role was to spread concerns about whether the new teacher could handle the unique challenges of educating elite students. The trio's strategy was working exactly as planned. By the end of Serena's second week, she began noticing that her lesson materials had been subtly rearranged when she returned from lunch, her computer login credentials required frequent resets, and scheduled meetings with other faculty members were mysteriously canceled without explanation. However, Serena's years of martial arts training had taught her to recognize patterns in seemingly random events. Master Chen had often emphasized that true awareness meant seeing not just individual actions but the connections between them. As she observed the escalating incidents, Serena began to understand that she was facing an organized campaign rather than isolated coincidences. The realization brought her a strange sense of relief. Random hostility was confusing and demoralizing, but strategic opposition was something she could analyze and counter. In the dojo, she had learned to study her opponent's fighting styles, identifying their preferred techniques and defensive weaknesses. This situation, while more complex, required the same methodical approach. Serena decided to document everything, maintaining detailed records of each incident along with dates, times, and potential witnesses. Her academic training had taught her the importance of evidence-based analysis, and she applied that same rigor to understanding the campaign against her. She also began reaching out to students individually, building relationships that would help her distinguish between genuine academic concerns and manufactured conflicts. During this period, she discovered that Riverside Academy harbored a significant population of students who felt marginalized by the school's emphasis on wealth and social status. These were academically talented young people whose families, while comfortable, couldn't compete with the extravagant lifestyles of their classmates. Many had watched previous teachers struggle against the same forces now targeting Serena, and they recognized the patterns, even if they felt powerless to intervene. One such student was Maya Patel, a brilliant sophomore whose parents owned a small accounting firm. Maya had witnessed Connor's group destroy 2 previous teachers and understood exactly how their system worked. She approached Dr. Williams Hayes after class one afternoon, ostensibly to ask about an assignment, but actually to offer a subtle warning. "Dr. Williams Hayes," Maya said carefully, glancing around to ensure they weren't overheard, "I really appreciate how you encourage different perspectives in class. Some teachers here, they struggle when certain students don't like their approach. I hope you know that many of us value what you're bringing to our education." The message was clear despite its careful phrasing, and Serena felt grateful for the young woman's courage in reaching out. She began to understand that her battle wasn't just personal, it represented a larger conflict over the soul of the institution. Would Riverside Academy remain a place where wealth determined worth, or could it evolve into a genuine community of learning? As the campaign against her intensified, Serena found herself drawing on the mental discipline that had carried her through the most challenging moments of her martial arts journey. She remembered the tournament where she had faced an opponent known for psychological intimidation, someone who specialized in making competitors doubt their own abilities before the match even began. Master Chen had prepared her for that moment by teaching her to find stillness within chaos, to maintain focus regardless of external pressures. "The strongest fighter," he had said, "is not the one who never feels fear, but the one who acts with wisdom despite feeling afraid." Now, facing a different kind of opponent, Serena applied those same principles. She continued teaching with passion and integrity, refusing to modify her approach to appease her critics. She maintained professional relationships with colleagues who seemed distant, understanding that some of their coolness might stem from institutional pressure rather than personal judgment. Most importantly, she began building a network of allies among students and faculty members who shared her vision of education as a transformative force. These relationships would prove crucial as Connor's group prepared to escalate their campaign from subtle intimidation to direct confrontation. The turning point came during a faculty meeting where Principal Thornton announced new guidelines for classroom management that seemed specifically designed to constrain Serena's collaborative teaching style. As she listened to policies that would eliminate discussion-based learning and student-centered activities, Serena realized that her opponents had successfully influenced the administration. But instead of feeling defeated, she felt the familiar surge of determination that had carried her through countless sparring matches and academic challenges. The rules of engagement were becoming clear, and Serena Williams Hayes was ready to fight for everything she believed education should represent. That evening, as she practiced her kata in the solitude of her apartment, each movement precise and powerful, Serena prepared herself for the battles ahead. She knew that Connor Mitchell and his allies had underestimated not just her martial arts skills, but her understanding of strategy, patience, and the long game that real change required. The stage was set for a confrontation that would determine not just Serena's future at Riverside Academy, but the kind of institution it would become for future generations of students. 3 weeks into the semester, the atmosphere at Riverside Academy had shifted dramatically. What began as subtle undermining had evolved into an intricate web of manipulation that touched every aspect of Dr. Serena Williams Hayes' professional life. Yet beneath the surface of this coordinated assault, an unexpected counter-movement was quietly taking shape. It started with small gestures of solidarity. Anonymous notes appeared in Serena's mailbox expressing appreciation for her teaching methods. Students began lingering after class to share personal connections to the literature they were studying. Most significantly, a group of faculty members who had initially seemed distant began reaching out with offers of collaboration and support. The leader of this informal resistance was Dr. Rachel Martinez, a veteran Spanish teacher who had survived her own battles with entitled students and their influential families. Rachel had watched previous teachers fall victim to the same systematic campaigns, and she recognized in Serena a kindred spirit who might finally have the strength to stand firm against the toxic culture that had infected their institution. "I've been teaching here for 12 years, Rachel confided during a carefully arranged coffee meeting off campus. "I've seen this pattern destroy good educators who came here with passion and integrity. The administration knows what's happening, but they're trapped between doing what's right and maintaining the financial support that keeps this place running." Rachel revealed the existence of an underground network of faculty members who had been quietly documenting incidents of student intimidation and family interference for years. They had accumulated extensive evidence of how the school's wealthiest families manipulated academic policies and personnel decisions, but had never found the right moment or the right person to bring these issues into the open. "The problem," Rachel explained, "is that previous teachers either left before the situation could be addressed, or they were so damaged by the experience that they couldn't effectively advocate for change. You're different, Serena. You have credentials they can't dismiss, and there's something about your presence that suggests you won't be easily broken." Meanwhile, Connor Mitchell was growing increasingly frustrated with the slow pace of his campaign against Dr. Williams Hayes. His previous targets had shown clear signs of stress within the first 2 weeks, but Serena remained remarkably composed and continued teaching with the same enthusiasm that had marked her first day. This resilience infuriated Connor, who was accustomed to seeing quick results from his psychological warfare tactics. The frustration led Connor to make a critical error in judgment. During a heated discussion with Brandon and Kevin, he revealed the full extent of his family's involvement in the campaign against Serena, unaware that his conversation was being overheard by Jasmine Washington, a junior who worked as a student aide in the administrative office. Jasmine had grown up in Phoenix's inner city before earning a partial scholarship to Riverside Academy. She understood firsthand what Dr. Williams Hayes represented: proof that excellence could emerge from any background, and that education could serve as a bridge between worlds. When she heard Connor boasting about his father's phone calls to school board members, Jasmine realized that the attack on her favorite teacher was far more sophisticated than anyone had imagined. Rather than confronting Connor directly, Jasmine made a strategic decision to gather more information. Her position as a student aide gave her access to administrative communications, and she began carefully documenting the connections between the Mitchell family's complaints and subsequent policy changes that seemed designed to constrain Dr. Williams Hayes' teaching methods. Jasmine's investigation revealed a disturbing pattern. Each time Connor's group targeted a teacher, specific administrative concerns would emerge about that teacher's methods, followed by policy changes that made their preferred approaches impossible to implement. Teachers who refused to adapt to these constraints found themselves facing increasingly hostile evaluations, and eventually chose to resign rather than continue fighting a system that seemed designed to defeat them. But Jasmine also discovered something that gave her hope. Dr. Williams Hayes wasn't the first teacher to inspire student loyalty strong enough to generate active resistance. There were others, current and former students who had been positively impacted by teachers who later became targets of the same systematic campaign she was now witnessing. This discovery led Jasmine to reach out to alumni who had graduated in previous years, many of whom still felt angry about the way their favorite teachers had been forced out. She began building a database of students and graduates who were willing to speak publicly about the pattern of intimidation they had witnessed, creating a potential coalition that could challenge the narrative being constructed by Connor's family. At the same time, Dr. Williams Hayes was conducting her own investigation into the school's culture and history. Her academic background had taught her to research thoroughly before drawing conclusions, and she applied that same methodology to understanding the forces arrayed against her. She spent evenings reviewing local newspaper archives, school board meeting minutes, and social media discussions about Riverside Academy. What she discovered was an institution caught between competing visions of education. On one side were families who viewed the school primarily as a credential factory, a place where their children's admission to elite universities could be secured through a combination of grade inflation and strategic donations. On the other side were educators and families who believed in genuine academic challenge and personal growth, regardless of economic background. The tension between these philosophies had been building for years, with neither side strong enough to definitively win the battle for the school's identity. Previous conflicts had resulted in compromise solutions that satisfied no one and left underlying problems unresolved. But Serena's arrival had crystallized these tensions in a way that made continued avoidance impossible. Her teaching methods challenged students to think critically about literature's social and political implications, encouraging discussions about inequality, justice, and the responsibility of educated individuals to contribute positively to society. These themes resonate powerfully with students from diverse backgrounds, but they also made some wealthy families uncomfortable by suggesting that privilege came with obligations, rather than just benefits. Kevin Park, with his strategic mind and understanding of long-term planning, recognized that the campaign against Dr. Williams-Hayes had reached a critical juncture. The teacher's continued popularity with students and growing support among faculty meant that a different approach would be necessary to achieve their ultimate goal of forcing her resignation. He proposed a more aggressive strategy that would force a public confrontation, creating a situation where Dr. Williams-Hayes would be compelled to either compromise her principles or face consequences that would make her position untenable. The plan required careful timing and precise execution, but Kevin was confident it would succeed where subtler methods had failed. Brandon Torres was eager to move beyond psychological intimidation to more direct forms of confrontation. His athlete's mentality favored decisive action over prolonged campaigns, and he had grown impatient with the careful maneuvering that Kevin preferred. He began pushing for opportunities to challenge Dr. Williams-Hayes publicly, hoping to provoke a reaction that would justify more aggressive retaliation. As October arrived in Phoenix, bringing relief from the summer heat but also increasing tension within Riverside Academy's walls, both sides prepared for a confrontation that would determine not just Dr. Serena Williams-Hayes' future, but the fundamental character of the institution itself. The underground network of supporters had grown stronger and more organized, while Connor's group had decided that subtlety was no longer sufficient to achieve their goals. The stage was set for a battle that would test everything Serena had learned about courage, strategy, and the power of standing firm in defense of one's principles, even when facing overwhelming opposition. The first week of October brought an unexpected opportunity that would change everything. Riverside Academy's annual Excellence in Education Showcase was scheduled for the third Friday of the month, an event where teachers demonstrated innovative classroom techniques to parents, school board members, and potential donors. Dr. Serena Williams-Hayes had been assigned to present her interactive literature discussion methods, unaware that this assignment was part of Kevin Park's carefully orchestrated plan. Kevin had spent weeks manipulating the selection process, ensuring that Dr. Williams-Hayes would be placed in the most visible and vulnerable position possible. He had convinced the showcase committee that featuring the new teacher's methods would demonstrate the school's commitment to educational innovation, while privately preparing Connor and Brandon for a public confrontation that would expose what he termed her radical agenda. The showcase presentation was scheduled for the same week as midterm grades, creating additional pressure for students whose parents would be present to hear about their academic progress. Kevin had deliberately failed several assignments in Dr. Williams-Hayes' class, calculating that his parents' reaction to poor grades would provide perfect cover for a broader attack on her teaching competence. But Kevin's plan contained a fatal flaw that he hadn't anticipated. His strategy relied on the assumption that Dr. Williams-Hayes would be isolated and defensive when faced with public criticism. He had no way of knowing about the growing network of support that had been building around her, or about her own strategic preparation for exactly this type of confrontation. Serena had recognized the showcase assignment as a potential trap from the moment it was announced. Her years of competitive martial arts had taught her to recognize when opponents were maneuvering her into disadvantageous positions, and every instinct warned her that this public presentation was designed to become a public humiliation. Instead of avoiding the challenge, however, Serena decided to use it as an opportunity to take control of the narrative. She spent the week before the showcase reaching out to her student allies, particularly those who had thrived under her teaching methods, and asked them to be prepared to speak about their learning experiences if questions arose during the presentation. Maya Patel had become one of Serena's most vocal supporters, and she eagerly agreed to help coordinate a student response team. Maya reached out to classmates across different grade levels who had been positively impacted by Dr. Williams-Hayes' teaching, creating a diverse group that included students from various economic and ethnic backgrounds. The group included David Chen, whose family had immigrated from Taiwan and who found Dr. Williams-Hayes' emphasis on multiple perspectives particularly meaningful. Sarah Johnson, a ranch owner's daughter who initially resisted discussions about social justice, but had gradually developed a more nuanced understanding of literature's political dimensions. And Marcus Williams, a scholarship student from South Phoenix, who saw Dr. Williams-Hayes as proof that academic excellence could emerge from any community. Meanwhile, Jasmine Washington had made a breakthrough in her investigation of the administrative manipulation that had been targeting Dr. Williams-Hayes. While filing documents in the principal's office, she had discovered email exchanges between Principal Thornton and James Mitchell that revealed the extent of external pressure being applied to influence personnel decisions. The email showed that James Mitchell had threatened to withdraw his foundation's funding for the school's new library wing unless, quote, concerns about teaching quality were addressed. The messages also revealed that other wealthy families had been contacted and encouraged to express similar concerns, creating an artificial groundswell of opposition that appeared to represent broader community sentiment. Jasmine faced a difficult decision about how to use this explosive information. Revealing the emails would expose the corruption that was undermining the school's educational mission, but it would also place her own scholarship and future at risk. After days of internal struggle, she decided that some principles were more important than personal security. She reached out to Dr. Rachel Martinez, who had emerged as the leader of the Faculty Resistance Network. Rachel immediately understood the significance of Jasmine's discovery and began coordinating with other teachers to document how administrative interference had affected their own teaching practices. The faculty network had grown to include unexpected allies, including Coach Thompson from the athletic department, who had become disgusted with how some student-athletes were using their status to intimidate classmates and teachers. Coach Thompson brought unique credibility to the group, as his support for Dr. Williams-Hayes couldn't be dismissed as political correctness or academic elitism. As the showcase date approached, both sides prepared for what they understood would be a decisive confrontation. Connor Mitchell spent the week rallying his family's social network, ensuring that influential parents would attend the presentation ready to ask pointed questions about Dr. Williams-Hayes' experimental methods and their impact on academic rigor. Brandon Torres prepared for a more direct approach, planning to challenge Dr. Williams-Hayes during the presentation itself by questioning her authority and competence in front of the assembled audience. His role was to create a moment of public disrespect that would demonstrate her inability to maintain classroom control. Kevin Park had prepared what he considered the perfect trap, a series of seemingly innocent questions about curriculum standards and college preparation that were designed to make Dr. Williams-Hayes appear defensive and unprofessional. He had coached his parents on exactly what concerns to raise, creating the appearance of spontaneous community worry about educational quality. But Kevin had made a critical miscalculation. His strategy assumed that Dr. Williams-Hayes lacked the political sophistication to recognize and counter his manipulation. He had no understanding of the strategic thinking that had carried her through years of competitive martial arts, where reading opponents and anticipating their moves meant the difference between victory and defeat. 3 days before the showcase, Dr. Williams-Hayes requested a private meeting with Principal Thornton. During that conversation, she calmly presented evidence of the coordinated campaign against her, including documentation of the suspicious timing of policy changes and the connection between family complaints and administrative decisions. Principal Thornton found herself in an impossible position. She couldn't deny the pattern that Dr. Williams-Hayes had identified, but she also couldn't afford to alienate the families whose financial support kept the school operating. Her response was to suggest that perhaps a, quote, approach to teaching might help avoid unnecessary conflicts. Serena's reply was delivered with the same calm intensity that had served her well in countless sparring matches. Dr. Thornton, I came here to provide the best possible education for my students. If that creates conflicts with people who prefer convenience over excellence, then those conflicts reveal something important about our institutional values. I plan to continue teaching with integrity, regardless of external pressure. The conversation ended with both women understanding that the upcoming showcase would determine not just Dr. Williams-Hayes' future at Riverside Academy, but the school's fundamental commitment to educational excellence over political expediency. As the final preparations were made, students, faculty, and families all sensed that Friday's presentation would be far more than a routine demonstration of teaching methods. It would be a battle for the soul of their institution, with both sides prepared to fight for their vision of what education should represent in American society. Friday evening arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made Phoenix evenings perfect for outdoor events. The Riverside Academy courtyard had been transformed into an elegant showcase venue, with white tents, sophisticated lighting, and carefully arranged seating that could accommodate over 200 parents, board members, and community leaders. The atmosphere buzzed with anticipation as Arizona's educational elite gathered to observe what many believed would be a routine demonstration of teaching excellence. Dr. Serena Williams Hayes arrived 30 minutes early, dressed in a sharp navy blue blazer and carrying a leather portfolio that contained not just her presentation materials, but also carefully organized documentation of everything that had transpired over the past 6 weeks. Her years of martial arts competition had taught her that preparation extended far beyond technical skill. Mental readiness and strategic positioning often determined outcomes before the first move was made. As she arranged her materials at the presentation station, Serena noticed the careful choreography already unfolding around her. James Mitchell had positioned himself prominently in the front row, flanked by other influential parents who nodded in acknowledgement as he whispered instructions. His wife, Victoria Mitchell, wore the kind of understated jewelry that quietly announced wealth while maintaining the appearance of tasteful restraint. Connor Mitchell sat with studied casualness among a group of students whose body language suggested coordinated purpose rather than casual attendance. Brandon Torres positioned himself near the student seating area where his physical presence could intimidate anyone considering speaking in support of Dr. Williams Hayes. Kevin Park had claimed a seat that provided optimal sightlines to both the presentation area and the parent section, allowing him to signal coordination between different phases of their planned disruption. But Kevin's strategic positioning also allowed him to observe something that immediately concerned him: the unusual number of students present who weren't typically involved in school events. Maya Patel had not only attended, but had apparently convinced numerous classmates to join her, creating an unexpectedly large student audience that could complicate their plans for controlled disruption. Dr. Rachel Martinez had also arrived early, accompanied by several faculty members whose presence sent a clear message of professional solidarity. Coach Thompson's attendance was particularly significant, as his reputation for no-nonsense integrity gave weight to his implicit endorsement of Dr. Williams Hayes' methods. Principal Thornton approached the microphone with visible tension, her introduction carefully crafted to appear supportive while avoiding language that might antagonize the powerful families in attendance. Tonight we have the privilege of observing innovative teaching methods that represent Riverside Academy's commitment to educational excellence, she announced, her tone suggesting both endorsement and reservation. Serena stepped forward to begin her presentation, immediately establishing the calm authority that had characterized her teaching from the first day. "Thank you for joining us this evening," she began, her voice carrying clearly across the courtyard without amplification. "I want to share with you an approach to literature education that honors both academic rigor and student engagement." She had designed her presentation to demonstrate rather than merely describe her methods, beginning with a brief analysis of how different perspectives on a single literary passage could reveal layers of meaning that enriched rather than confused understanding. Her examples were carefully chosen to showcase critical thinking skills while avoiding topics that could be easily characterized as controversial or political. For the first 15 minutes, the presentation proceeded smoothly. Parents nodded approvingly as they watched students demonstrate sophisticated analytical skills, and even James Mitchell seemed grudgingly impressed by the academic quality of the discussion. Serena had deliberately chosen participants who represented diverse backgrounds and viewpoints, making it impossible to dismiss their contributions as representing any single agenda. But Kevin Park had anticipated this opening phase and had prepared his intervention for the moment when the formal presentation transitioned to audience questions. As soon as Principal Thornton invited community input, Kevin raised his hand with practiced confidence. "Dr. Williams Hayes," he began, his tone respectful but pointed. "I appreciate the creativity of your approach, but I'm concerned about how this discussion-based method prepares students for standardized testing and college admissions. Are you confident that students spending time on multiple interpretations will perform as well as those focusing on established analytical frameworks?" The question was expertly crafted to sound like legitimate academic concern while implying that Dr. Williams Hayes prioritized innovation over results. Several parents murmured agreement, and James Mitchell leaned forward with obvious interest in her response. Serena recognized the trap immediately, but chose to address it directly rather than defensively. "That's an excellent question, Kevin, and it speaks to a fundamental issue in education," she replied. "The analytical skills students develop through examining multiple perspectives actually strengthen their performance on standardized assessments because they learn to consider various approaches before selecting the most effective one." She turned to address the broader audience, her confidence growing as she moved into familiar territory. When students understand that literature invites exploration rather than demanding single correct answers, they develop the flexible thinking that colleges value most highly. Our discussion methods don't replace traditional analysis. They enhance it by teaching students to think rather than merely memorize. Maya Patel had been waiting for exactly this moment. She stood and addressed the audience with surprising poise for a sophomore. "I can speak to that directly," she said. "My SAT practice scores have improved significantly since Dr. Williams-Hayes started teaching us to consider multiple approaches to reading comprehension. The skills transfer directly to test-taking strategies." Her intervention clearly frustrated Kevin, who had expected to control the flow of questions and responses. But before he could follow up, David Chen raised his hand and added his own testimony about improved academic performance, followed by Sarah Johnson's unexpected endorsement of teaching methods she had initially resisted. Connor Mitchell realized that the evening was not developing according to plan. The students' support for Dr. Williams-Hayes was more organized and articulate than they had anticipated, and his father's carefully prepared questions were being neutralized by genuine academic evidence. Deciding that subtlety had failed, Connor abandoned Kevin's strategic approach and stood up in the middle of Sarah Johnson's comments. "This is ridiculous," he declared loudly enough to interrupt her and capture everyone's attention. "We're sitting here listening to a bunch of social justice nonsense disguised as education." The courtyard fell silent, as Connor's outburst violated every norm of respectful public discourse. Parents looked shocked, students stared in disbelief, and faculty members exchanged glances of professional disapproval. But Connor, committed now to direct confrontation, continued his attack. "Dr. Williams-Hayes, you came here from whatever university gave you that degree, thinking you could change how we do things at Riverside Academy," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the stunned audience. "But maybe you're just too stupid to understand that we have standards here that actually matter." The word hung in the air like a physical blow. The calculated cruelty of calling a doctoral-level educator stupid in front of her colleagues, students, and the community revealed the true nature of the opposition she had been facing. Several parents gasped audibly, and Maya Patel looked as if she had been personally attacked. But Serena Williams-Hayes stood perfectly still, her expression calm and controlled. Years of martial arts training had taught her that the most dangerous moment in any confrontation came when opponents abandoned strategy for raw aggression. Connor's public insult had just provided her with the opportunity she had been waiting for without even realizing it. The silence stretched for several seconds as everyone present absorbed the implications of what had just occurred. Then Serena stepped forward, her voice carrying the quiet authority that had commanded respect in dojos across 3 states. "Connor," she said, her tone gentle but unmistakably firm, "I think this conversation has revealed something important about the values we want to promote at Riverside Academy. Perhaps we should explore what strength really means." At that moment, everyone present understood that the evening's carefully planned demonstration had become something entirely different. A test of character that would determine not just the future of one teacher, but the fundamental principles that would guide their entire educational community. The seconds following Connor Mitchell's explosive outburst stretched like an eternity. Dr. Serena Williams-Hayes stood in the center of the courtyard, surrounded by over 200 members of the Riverside Academy community, all waiting to see how she would respond to being publicly called stupid by a student whose family wielded enormous influence over the institution. In those suspended moments, Serena felt the familiar calm that had carried her through countless martial arts competitions. Master Chen had taught her that true strength revealed itself not in the absence of challenge, but in the precise moment when everything hung in the balance. This was that moment, and she knew that her response would determine not just her own future, but the future of every student who had ever been intimidated into silence. "Connor," she said, her voice carrying across the silent courtyard with crystalline clarity, I appreciate your honesty. It takes courage to reveal who you really are in front of so many people." The unexpected response clearly caught Connor off guard. He had anticipated anger, defensiveness, or humiliation, reactions that would justify escalating his aggression. Instead, Dr. Williams Hayes had responded with what sounded almost like gratitude, delivered with a composure that made his outburst appear even more inappropriate by contrast. Brandon Torres, recognizing that their plan was spinning out of control, decided to provide backup for his friend. He stood up from his position among the students, his considerable bulk casting a shadow as he moved closer to the presentation area. "Yeah, Connor's right," Brandon announced, his voice carrying the implicit threat that his physical presence had always provided. "Maybe it's time someone told you the truth about what people really think of your teaching methods. You don't belong here, and everyone knows it." The crowd stirred uneasily as Brandon's intimidation tactics became apparent. Several parents exchanged concerned glances, while faculty members began moving subtly toward the student section. The evening was transforming from an educational showcase into something that felt increasingly dangerous. But Maya Patel had been watching for exactly this escalation. She stood up with determination that surprised even her own friends, her voice clear and unwavering despite her obvious nervousness. "That's not true, Brandon," she declared. "Dr. Williams Hayes has helped me understand literature in ways that no teacher ever has before. She's made me a better student and a better person." Her courage seemed to break a dam of suppressed support. David Chen rose next, followed by Sarah Johnson, then Marcus Williams. One by one, students who had been positively impacted by Dr. Williams Hayes' teaching began standing and speaking, their testimonies creating a powerful counter-narrative to the hostility being displayed by Connor's group. "She taught me that my family's immigrant experience gives me a unique perspective on American literature," David said. "She helped me understand that ranching families like mine have stories worth telling too," Sarah added. "She's the first teacher who made me believe I could succeed in college," Marcus concluded. Kevin Park watched this development with growing alarm. The student response was spontaneous and heartfelt in a way that his carefully orchestrated campaign could never match. Worse, the adults in the audience were clearly being moved by these authentic testimonials from young people they had known since childhood. Desperate to regain control of the situation, Kevin stood and attempted to redirect the conversation back to his prepared talking points. "All of this is very touching," he said with barely concealed condescension. "But we're here to discuss educational outcomes, not feelings. Can Dr. Williams Hayes provide concrete evidence that her methods produce measurable academic improvement?" Jasmine Washington had been waiting for this moment throughout the entire evening. She stepped forward from her position near the back of the student section, carrying a manila folder that she had prepared specifically for this confrontation. "Actually, Kevin, I can provide that evidence," she announced, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to reveal. "I work as a student aide in the administrative office, and I've had access to academic performance data that might interest everyone here." Principal Thornton's face went pale as she realized what Jasmine was about to disclose. James Mitchell leaned forward with sudden attention, sensing that the evening was about to take another unexpected turn. Jasmine opened her folder and began reading from carefully organized documents. In the 6 weeks since Dr. Williams Hayes began teaching, student engagement in English literature classes has increased by 47%. Assignment completion rates have improved by 32%. Most significantly, students in her classes have shown measurable improvement in critical thinking assessments compared to previous semesters. She paused, looking directly at Kevin Park before continuing. "But more importantly, I've also documented something else that everyone here should know about." The courtyard fell silent again as Jasmine's tone shifted from academic reporting to something more serious. She reached into her folder and withdrew a different set of documents, photocopies of the emails she had discovered between Principal Thornton and James Mitchell. "These are communications between Mr. Mitchell and school administrators that show how wealthy families have been manipulating educational policies and personnel decisions," she announced. The campaign against Dr. Williams Hayes wasn't about academic standards. It was about silencing a teacher who challenged students to think critically about privilege, justice, and responsibility. The revelation hit the assembled crowd like a thunderbolt. Parents who had been prepared to question Dr. Williams Hayes' methods suddenly found themselves confronting evidence that their educational community had been corrupted by the very families they had trusted to support it. James Mitchell shot to his feet, his face flushed with fury and embarrassment. "That's completely inappropriate," he shouted. "A student has no business accessing confidential communications, and these accusations are—" "True," Dr. Rachel Martinez interrupted, stepping forward with her own folder of documentation. Jasmine's discoveries confirmed what faculty members have been documenting for years. "We have evidence of systematic interference with educational practices, threats against teachers who refuse to comply with inappropriate demands, and a pattern of retaliation against anyone who challenged this corruption." Coach Thompson moved to stand beside Dr. Martinez, his presence lending additional credibility to her statements. "I've watched good teachers leave this school because they couldn't fight against families who treated education like a commodity they could purchase," he said. "Dr. Williams-Hayes represents everything we should want in an educator, and the campaign against her has been shameful." Connor Mitchell, seeing his family's influence crumbling before his eyes, made a final desperate attempt to reassert control through intimidation. He strode toward Dr. Williams-Hayes with obvious aggressive intent, his hands clenched into fists. "You think you're so smart with your degrees and your fancy words," he snarled, moving close enough that his physical threat became unmistakable. "But you're just another." He never finished the sentence. As Connor stepped into her personal space with clear, hostile intent, Dr. Williams-Hayes moved with the fluid precision that had made her a championship martial artist. In one smooth motion, she sidestepped Connor's advance and gently redirected his momentum, using his own aggressive energy to send him stumbling past her. The technique was so subtle that most observers couldn't quite process what had happened. Connor simply found himself off balance and staggering, his intended intimidation having somehow resulted in his own embarrassment. He caught himself against a nearby chair, looking around in confusion and growing humiliation. Brandon Torres, seeing his friend's predicament, charged forward with the kind of direct aggression that had always worked for him in the past. But Dr. Williams-Hayes was ready for him too. As Brandon reached for her, she executed a perfect wrist control technique that froze him in place without causing injury, her martial arts training allowing her to neutralize his threat while maintaining complete composure. "Brandon," she said calmly, still maintaining the joint lock that kept him immobilized, "violence is never the answer to intellectual disagreement. I hope someday you'll understand that." Kevin Park, watching his two allies neutralized with embarrassing ease, realized that their entire campaign had collapsed. But his analytical mind also recognized an opportunity in the chaos. If he could position himself as the voice of reason, trying to de-escalate a situation that had gotten out of hand, he might salvage something from the disaster. "Everyone please calm down," he called out, attempting to sound like a peacemaker. "This has gotten completely out of hand. Maybe we should—" "No, Kevin," Maya Patel interrupted, her voice stronger now than it had been all evening. "This needed to happen. Everyone needed to see what Dr. Williams-Hayes has been dealing with, and everyone needed to understand what kind of students Connor, Brandon, and you really are." She turned to address the entire assembly, her courage inspiring others to find their own voices. "Dr. Williams-Hayes never asked us to defend her. She never complained about the harassment she was facing. She just kept teaching us with passion and integrity, even when she knew some of you were trying to destroy her career." Dr. Williams-Hayes released Brandon's wrist and stepped back, her defensive posture relaxing as the immediate physical threat passed. The courtyard remained tense, but the dynamic had fundamentally shifted. The teacher who had been portrayed as a disruptive outsider now stood at the center of a community that was finally seeing clearly. "I came to Riverside Academy because I believe in the transformative power of education," Serena said, her voice carrying to every corner of the courtyard. "I've faced challenges before, in martial arts competitions, in graduate school, in life, but I've never encountered anything quite like the systematic campaign that has been waged against me here." She paused, looking directly at James Mitchell before continuing. "But I've also never experienced the kind of support I've received from students and colleagues who believe that education should be about growth, not comfort. Tonight has shown me that this community has the strength to choose its values deliberately." Principal Thornton stepped forward, recognizing that her own credibility hung in the balance. "Dr. Williams-Hayes, on behalf of the administration, I want to apologize for any failure to support you appropriately during this difficult period. Your teaching excellence is obvious, and the loyalty you've inspired among students speaks to your character." The words carried the weight of institutional recognition, but they also represented a fundamental shift in the school's power dynamics. The wealthy families who had grown accustomed to controlling educational decisions through financial pressure now found themselves publicly exposed and morally isolated. James Mitchell gathered his wife and son, preparing to leave the courtyard with what dignity remained to them. But as they moved toward the exit, Connor turned back for one final confrontation. "This isn't over," he called out, his voice carrying more desperation than threat. "You think you've won something, but you have no idea what my family can do to people who cross us." Dr. Williams Hayes met his gaze with the same calm strength that had carried her through the entire evening. "Connor," she said, "I hope someday you discover that real power comes from lifting others up, not tearing them down. The invitation to learn and grow is always open." As the Mitchell family disappeared into the darkness beyond the courtyard lights, the remaining community members began to process what they had witnessed. Students clustered around Dr. Williams Hayes, their respect and admiration obvious. Faculty members discussed how to rebuild trust and restore educational integrity. Parents grappled with questions about their own role in enabling the corruption that had been exposed. The evening that had begun as a routine educational showcase had become a defining moment for Riverside Academy, a community reckoning that would reshape relationships and values for years to come. And at the center of it all stood Dr. Serena Williams Hayes, a teacher whose strength, integrity, and martial arts training had revealed truths that some had tried desperately to keep hidden. The weeks following the showcase evening brought changes to Riverside Academy that no one could have anticipated. The dramatic confrontation had shattered illusions and forced honest conversations that had been avoided for years. As November brought cooler temperatures to Phoenix, the school's atmosphere underwent a transformation that reached into every classroom, hallway, and administrative office. Dr. Serena Williams Hayes found herself at the center of this institutional renaissance, but not in the way she had originally expected. Rather than simply being vindicated as a teacher, she had become a catalyst for examining fundamental questions about education, privilege, and community values. The role was both exhilarating and exhausting, requiring her to navigate complex political dynamics while maintaining her primary focus on student learning. The immediate aftermath of the showcase had been swift and decisive. Within 48 hours, the school board had announced an independent investigation into allegations of improper influence over educational policies. James Mitchell's foundation was placed under review, and several board members with financial ties to his business empire recused themselves from personnel decisions. Principal Thornton, recognizing that her own credibility had been compromised, requested early retirement and was replaced by an interim administrator committed to educational transparency. But the most significant changes were happening at the student level, where the events of that Friday evening had fundamentally altered social dynamics that had seemed immutable. The three students who had led the campaign against Dr. Williams Hayes faced consequences that extended far beyond administrative discipline. Connor Mitchell's world collapsed with stunning speed. His public outburst and subsequent humiliation had destroyed his reputation among classmates who had previously feared or admired him. More importantly, his father's business empire began experiencing unexpected difficulties as community members reconsidered their relationships with the Mitchell family. Several major contracts were quietly terminated, and the family found themselves increasingly isolated from the social circles that had once elevated their status. James Mitchell, faced with the choice between defending his son's behavior and salvaging his business relationships, made a calculated decision that would forever alter his family dynamics. He arranged for Connor to be transferred to a prestigious boarding school in New England, effectively exiling him from Arizona and the consequences of his actions. The transfer was presented as an educational opportunity, but everyone understood it as an admission of defeat. Connor's departure from Riverside Academy was met with relief rather than sympathy. Students who had endured years of his bullying felt free to express themselves without fear of retaliation. Teachers began implementing innovative curricula that had been suppressed during the period of family interference. The change in atmosphere was palpable, as if a toxic cloud had finally lifted from the campus. Brandon Torres faced different but equally profound consequences. His attempt to physically intimidate Dr. Williams Hayes in front of the entire community had destroyed his reputation as a respected athlete. Coach Thompson, who had witnessed the confrontation, immediately suspended Brandon from the football team and recommended anger management counseling as a condition for potential reinstatement. But Brandon's transformation proved more complex than simple punishment. The public embarrassment of being effortlessly neutralized by a teacher half his size had shattered his self-image as someone whose physical strength commanded respect. For weeks after the showcase, he struggled with depression and confusion about his identity, beyond intimidation and aggression. The turning point came when Dr. Williams Hayes herself reached out to him. Rather than gloating over his downfall, she offered to help him explore constructive outlets for his obvious intelligence and leadership potential. Their conversations revealed a young man who had never learned to express vulnerability or ask for help, someone who had used aggression as a defense against his own fears of inadequacy. Under Dr. Williams Hayes' mentorship, Brandon began writing about his experiences with toxic masculinity and the pressure to maintain dominance through fear. His essays, initially awkward and defensive, gradually evolved into powerful reflections on identity, belonging, and the courage required to change destructive patterns. By December, he had submitted a piece to the school literary magazine that honestly examined his own journey, from bully to someone seeking redemption. Kevin Park's response to exposure proved the most calculating and ultimately the most troubling. Unlike Connor's explosive rage or Brandon's confused shame, Kevin adapted to the new reality with the same strategic thinking that had made him dangerous in the first place. He publicly apologized for his role in the campaign against Dr. Williams Hayes, expressed regret for his poor judgment, and began positioning himself as a reformed student leader committed to positive change. But Dr. Williams Hayes, with her deep understanding of strategic thinking, recognized that Kevin's transformation was largely performative. She observed him carefully, noting how he continued to manipulate social dynamics while maintaining plausible deniability. His apologies were perfectly crafted, his reform narrative compelling, but his fundamental approach to power remained unchanged. The challenge Kevin presented was complex, because his new persona was genuinely beneficial to the school community. He organized anti-bullying workshops, advocated for student mental health resources, and consistently demonstrated academic excellence. Yet Dr. Williams Hayes understood that his motivations remained self-serving rather than altruistic, making him potentially more dangerous in the long term than Connor's crude aggression or Brandon's obvious intimidation. This recognition led to one of Dr. Williams Hayes' most important teaching moments. During a private conversation with Kevin, she acknowledged his intelligence and organizational skills while challenging him to examine his underlying motivations. "Kevin," she said during one of their meetings, "you have extraordinary potential to make positive contributions to any community you join, but lasting change requires genuine commitment to values beyond personal advancement. The choice between manipulation and authentic leadership is one that only you can make." Kevin's response revealed both his sophistication and his limitations. He understood exactly what Dr. Williams Hayes was suggesting, but he couldn't grasp why anyone would choose authentic vulnerability over strategic advantage. Their conversations continued throughout the semester, representing an ongoing dialogue between two very different approaches to intelligence and influence. Meanwhile, the students who had supported Dr. Williams Hayes during the showcase found themselves in unexpected leadership positions. Maya Patel emerged as a powerful voice for academic excellence and social justice, organizing study groups that brought together students from diverse backgrounds and coordinating community service projects that addressed local inequities. Jasmine Washington's courage in exposing the corruption had established her as a student advocate with unusual access to administrative processes. She used her position to push for greater transparency in school governance and to ensure that student voices were included in policy decisions. Her journalism teacher encouraged her to document the changes happening at Riverside Academy, resulting in a series of articles that attracted attention from education researchers across the Southwest. David Chen, Sarah Johnson, and Marcus Williams formed the core of a new student coalition that celebrated academic achievement while rejecting the elitist attitudes that had previously dominated campus culture. Their friendship, spanning different ethnic and economic backgrounds, became a model for the kind of inclusive community that Dr. Williams Hayes had envisioned when she first arrived at Riverside Academy. The faculty network that had supported Dr. Williams Hayes during her crisis evolved into a formal committee dedicated to educational innovation and teacher empowerment. Dr. Rachel Martinez assumed leadership of this group, working to implement policies that protected educators from inappropriate external pressure while maintaining accountability for student outcomes. Coach Thompson's support for Dr. Williams-Hayes had surprised many who had viewed him as focused solely on athletic achievement. His willingness to challenge student behavior that violated community values inspired other coaches and teachers to take stronger stands against bullying and entitlement. The athletic department began emphasizing character development alongside physical performance, creating programs that connected sports participation to academic success and community service. The changes at Riverside Academy attracted attention from educational reformers throughout Arizona and beyond. Dr. Williams-Hayes found herself invited to speak at conferences about standing up to institutional corruption and creating inclusive learning environments. Her presentations combined insights from her martial arts background with academic research on educational equity, offering practical strategies for teachers facing similar challenges. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from her own students. As the semester progressed, Dr. Williams-Hayes watched young people, who had never been encouraged to express their authentic voices, begin to flourish. Class discussions became more dynamic and inclusive, with students from different backgrounds sharing perspectives that enriched everyone's understanding. The literature curriculum that had been criticized as too experimental proved remarkably effective at developing critical thinking skills. Students in Dr. Williams-Hayes' classes consistently outperformed their peers on standardized assessments, while also demonstrating increased empathy and cultural awareness. The combination of academic rigor and social consciousness created graduates who were better prepared for both college success and civic engagement. As winter break approached, Dr. Williams-Hayes reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this point. The young woman who had arrived at Riverside Academy with carefully prepared lesson plans and quiet determination had become a symbol of resistance to educational corruption and a catalyst for institutional transformation. The process had required every lesson she had learned through years of martial arts training: patience, strategic thinking, courage under pressure, and the wisdom to know when to fight and when to redirect energy. Most importantly, it had reinforced her belief that true strength came not from dominating others, but from empowering them to discover their own potential. On the last day of classes before winter break, Dr. Williams-Hayes received an unexpected visitor. Connor Mitchell had returned from his boarding school in New England, ostensibly to visit family, but actually to seek a conversation with the teacher whose strength had exposed his weakness. The young man who entered her classroom bore little resemblance to the arrogant bully who had publicly called her stupid just 2 months earlier. His expensive clothes remained, but his swagger had been replaced by genuine humility. The experience of being an outsider at his new school, where his family's wealth carried no influence and his reputation preceded him, had forced Connor to confront aspects of himself he had never acknowledged. "Dr. Williams-Hayes," he began, his voice carrying none of its former condescension, "I know I have no right to ask for your time, but I wanted to apologize for everything I did and said, not because I have to, but because I finally understand how wrong I was." Serena listened as Connor described his experiences at boarding school, where his attempts to recreate his dominance at Riverside Academy had failed completely. Without his father's influence and his established social network, he had been forced to succeed or fail based on his own merits. The experience had been humbling and ultimately transformative. "I spent years thinking that power meant making other people smaller," Connor continued. "But watching how you handled everything, staying strong without being cruel, standing up without tearing down, showed me what real strength looks like." Dr. Williams-Hayes recognized the sincerity in Connor's words, while also understanding that genuine change would require sustained effort over time. "Connor," she replied, "acknowledging past mistakes is the first step toward growth. The question now is what you choose to do with that understanding." Their conversation lasted nearly an hour, covering topics that ranged from leadership and responsibility to the way privilege could either isolate people from or connect them to their communities. By the end, Connor had asked if he could correspond with Dr. Williams-Hayes during the remainder of his time at boarding school, seeking guidance as he worked to become someone worthy of the opportunities he had been given. As Connor left her classroom, Dr. Williams-Hayes felt a deep sense of satisfaction that had nothing to do with victory over opposition. Instead, it came from witnessing the possibility of redemption and growth, even in someone who had seemed irredeemably committed to destructive patterns. The winter break that followed provided time for reflection on the semester's extraordinary events. Dr. Williams-Hayes spent the holidays visiting family in Tucson, sharing stories of her experiences with parents who had always believed their daughter possessed the strength to overcome any challenge. Master Chen, now in his 70s but still teaching at the dojo where Serena had learned discipline and courage, listened with pride as she described how martial arts principles had guided her through the crisis. "You have honored everything we practice here," he told her during one of their conversations. "True martial arts is not about fighting, but about creating harmony through strength and wisdom. You have shown that these principles work in any arena where courage is required." As the new semester began, Riverside Academy felt like a fundamentally different institution. The toxic culture that had driven away previous teachers had been replaced by an environment that celebrated excellence while rejecting elitism. Students felt empowered to challenge ideas respectfully, teachers felt supported in their innovative approaches, and administrators focused on educational outcomes rather than donor management. Dr. Serena Williams-Hayes stood in her classroom on that first day of the spring semester, watching students file in with the kind of enthusiasm that had drawn her to teaching in the first place. The journey from that first threatening encounter with Connor Mitchell to this moment of educational renewal had required every ounce of strength, strategy, and wisdom she possessed. But as she looked at the faces of young people eager to learn and grow, she knew that every challenge had been worth facing. She had come to Riverside Academy to teach literature, but she had ended up teaching something far more important: that courage, integrity, and the refusal to accept injustice could transform even the most resistant institutions. The lesson would continue long after these students graduated, carried forward by young people who had learned that real strength meant standing up for others, that true intelligence meant questioning rather than accepting, and that the most important battles were fought not with fists, but with principles that never wavered in the face of opposition. 6 months later, the ripple effects of that transformative evening continued to spread throughout the Phoenix educational community and beyond. Dr. Williams-Hayes had been invited to consult with 3 other school districts facing similar challenges with wealthy family interference, her methods becoming a case study in educational leadership programs across the Southwest. The documentary filmmaker Maria Rodriguez approached the school about creating a film examining how one teacher's courage had catalyzed institutional change. The project, tentatively titled Standing Ground: Education and Equity in America, would follow several students and faculty members as they reflected on the events that had reshaped their understanding of power, privilege, and progress. Maya Patel had been accepted to Stanford University with a full scholarship, her college essay focusing on how witnessing principled leadership had inspired her own commitment to social justice advocacy. She planned to major in education policy with the goal of returning to Arizona to work on systemic reform initiatives. Before leaving for California, she established the Riverside Scholars Foundation, a mentorship program connecting current students with alumni committed to academic excellence and community service. Jasmine Washington's investigative journalism had earned her recognition from the Arizona Press Association, making her the youngest recipient ever of their Truth in Reporting Award. Her articles about corruption and educational governance had sparked legislative hearings about transparency requirements for school board operations. Several universities had already offered her early admission to their journalism programs, recognizing her potential to become a significant voice in education reporting. David Chen had channeled his experience with multicultural literature into founding an after-school program for recent immigrant students, helping them navigate American educational systems while maintaining connections to their cultural heritage. His work attracted funding from local foundations and had become a model for similar programs throughout the region. Sarah Johnson's transformation from resistant student to engaged learner had impressed agricultural science programs at several universities. Her senior project, examining sustainable farming practices through the lens of environmental literature, had won state-level recognition and demonstrated how interdisciplinary learning could address real-world challenges. Marcus Williams had overcome his initial skepticism about college attendance, ultimately earning acceptance to Arizona State University's education program with a focus on urban teaching. His goal was to return to South Phoenix schools, bringing the same kind of inspiring leadership he had experienced from Dr. Williams-Hayes to students who might otherwise never encounter it. The changes at Riverside Academy had also influenced faculty development across the district. Dr. Rachel Martinez had been promoted to curriculum coordinator, working to implement discussion-based learning methods in schools throughout the region. Her training workshops for new teachers emphasized both academic rigor and cultural responsiveness, ensuring that future educators would be better prepared to serve diverse student populations. Coach Thompson had expanded his character development initiatives beyond athletics, creating mentorship programs that paired upperclassmen with younger students facing social or academic challenges. His approach combined physical fitness with emotional intelligence training, helping students develop resilience and leadership skills that extended far beyond sports participation. The interim principal, Dr. Angela Foster, had been offered the permanent position after successfully rebuilding trust between administration, faculty, and families. Her background in conflict resolution and educational equity made her an ideal leader for an institution committed to honoring both excellence and inclusion. Under her leadership, Riverside Academy had developed policies ensuring that all major decisions involved input from students, teachers, and community members, rather than being dictated by wealthy donors. Brandon Torres had made perhaps the most surprising transformation of all the students involved in the original conflict. His anger management counseling had evolved into peer counseling training, and he now worked with younger students struggling with aggression and identity issues. His personal essays about toxic masculinity had been published in a national education journal, making him an unexpected advocate for mental health awareness among young men. His relationship with Dr. Williams-Hayes had developed into a genuine mentorship that addressed academic goals alongside personal growth. Brandon's grades had improved dramatically once he learned to channel his competitive nature into intellectual pursuits rather than social dominance. He had been accepted to several universities with strong psychology programs, planning to specialize in adolescent behavioral intervention. Kevin Park remained the most complex case among the three original antagonists. His surface-level reform had convinced many observers, and his academic achievements continued to open doors to prestigious opportunities. However, Dr. Williams-Hayes maintained regular check-ins with him, understanding that genuine character development required ongoing attention and support. Their conversations had gradually revealed the immense pressure Kevin faced from parents whose expectations left no room for failure or vulnerability. His strategic approach to relationships stemmed partly from never having experienced unconditional acceptance, making authentic connection feel impossibly risky. Dr. Williams-Hayes worked patiently to help him understand that true intelligence included emotional awareness and genuine empathy. Kevin's senior project had focused on ethical leadership in competitive environments, examining how high-achieving individuals could maintain integrity while pursuing ambitious goals. The research process had forced him to confront his own manipulative tendencies and consider alternative approaches to influence and success. Whether these insights would translate into lasting behavioral change remained an open question, but the foundation for growth had been established. The broader community impact extended beyond educational circles into local business and civic organizations. James Mitchell's fall from influence had created space for other voices in community leadership, including several parents who prioritized educational equity over social status. The Phoenix Chamber of Commerce had established new guidelines for corporate involvement in public education, ensuring that financial support enhanced rather than compromised academic integrity. The legal ramifications of the corruption exposure had led to reform legislation at the state level. Arizona lawmakers had strengthened transparency requirements for school board communications and created mechanisms for reporting inappropriate external pressure on educational decisions. The Riverside Academy Reform Act established clear boundaries between legitimate community involvement and improper interference with professional educational judgment. National education organizations had taken notice of the transformation as well. The American Federation of Teachers featured Dr. Williams-Hayes in their magazine, highlighting how martial arts principles had informed her approach to institutional change. The article sparked discussions about incorporating mindfulness and conflict resolution training into teacher preparation programs, recognizing that educators increasingly needed skills for navigating complex political environments. Dr. Williams-Hayes herself had begun writing a book about her experiences, tentatively titled The Warrior Teacher: Martial Arts Principles for Educational Leadership. The project explored how concepts like strategic thinking, emotional regulation, and principled resistance could empower educators facing hostile environments. Publishers had expressed strong interest, recognizing the potential for reaching audiences beyond the education field. Her speaking engagements had expanded to include corporate leadership conferences, where business executives sought insights about maintaining integrity under pressure and building authentic organizational cultures. The parallels between classroom management and team leadership had proven compelling to audiences struggling with their own workplace dynamics. The dojo where Dr. Williams Hayes had trained throughout college had invited her to teach a special class on applied martial arts philosophy, helping other practitioners understand how their training could inform professional and personal challenges beyond physical confrontation. Master Chen had expressed pride in seeing his teachings adapted to serve broader purposes while maintaining their essential spirit. As the school year drew to a close, Riverside Academy planned a special ceremony recognizing the students, faculty, and community members who had demonstrated courage during the transformation process. The event would celebrate not just individual achievements but the collective commitment to building an educational environment worthy of every student's potential. Dr. Williams Hayes had been asked to deliver the keynote address, an opportunity to reflect on the journey from that first challenging encounter with Connor Mitchell to the thriving learning community that had emerged from conflict and confrontation. Her speech would emphasize that lasting change required sustained effort from entire communities, not just heroic individual actions. The ceremony would also honor the less visible contributors to the transformation: the custodial staff who had reported vandalism, the cafeteria workers who had witnessed bullying incidents, the bus drivers who had observed concerning behavior, and the administrative assistants who had documented inappropriate communications. Their willingness to speak truth to power had been essential to exposing the full scope of the problems that needed addressing. As summer approaches, Dr. Williams Hayes prepares for a sabbatical that would allow her to complete her book, while visiting other schools facing similar challenges. The research would examine how martial arts-inspired leadership principles could be adapted to different cultural and economic contexts, ensuring that her methods could benefit educators in diverse settings. The lasting legacy of her first year at Riverside Academy would be measured not just in improved test scores or reduced disciplinary incidents, but in the confidence of students who had learned to advocate for themselves and others. Young people who had witnessed principled resistance to injustice would carry those lessons into their own careers and communities, creating ripple effects that would extend far beyond their graduation day. The transformation had also attracted the attention of teacher training programs at major universities, which began incorporating case studies based on the Riverside Academy experience into their curricula. Future educators would learn about the importance of building alliances, documenting evidence, and maintaining composure under pressure while standing firm in defense of educational values. As Dr. Williams Hayes packed up her classroom for the summer, she reflected on the photograph of her grandmother that had accompanied her through this extraordinary journey. The woman who had believed that education could change the world would have been proud to see how one teacher's courage had indeed transformed an entire institution and inspired countless others to stand up for what they believed was right. The story that had begun with a simple desire to teach literature had evolved into something far more significant: proof that individuals committed to justice and excellence could overcome even the most entrenched systems of privilege and corruption. The lesson would continue inspiring educators, students, and community leaders for generations to come, demonstrating that the most important battles were indeed won not through force, but through the unwavering application of principle, courage, and wisdom. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.